35B is part of the lesson that's called the name of a number. And what we're looking for here is a certain portion of the way. If I were to say, where would I be if I was driving from here to Walmart? How far would it be if I went half of the way? Well, that's pretty easy on all positive numbers like that. We don't have any problem. If I say, well, Walmart's 10 miles away, so I'm halfway there, I'll be 5 miles there. That's a distance. If I start talking about my beginning point and my ending point, I would just say, well, 5 miles added to my beginning point will be where I'm halfway there. And that's a simplistic way of thinking about it. But what happens when we have a word problem like this? What number is 2/3 of the way from 10 to 1? Now I went ahead and put a number line on here, and I said, well, 2/3 of the direction from 10 to 1. Well, 10 to 1 is my full distance. And most of us can figure it out in our head immediately and say, well, of course, 9 is how far away I'm going to be going, and I'm going -9 away, right? So if I started at 10 and I'm backing down the number line, I'll end up at 1, 9 spots away. But how could I write that in such a way that I could work it with a word problem and that I don't have to think about, well, 2/3 of the way back down? So it starts to get a little bit confusing. So on this one here, I'm going to say, well, if I say I want to know, I'm starting at 10. That's my x1 position, right? And I'm ending at x2 down here at 1. So I'm saying I want to go from 10 to 1, but I don't want to go all the way. I want to go 2/3 of the way. Well, we can estimate that and say, well, if I broke this into thirds on my thing, I'm going to be somewhere in here, right? And that would be 2/3 of the way, and then I could count on the number line back. But let's do this mathematically. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to start at my 10, because that's where they said to start. And I'm going to go 2/3 of the way down the change of x. Well, we remember from our previous part of this lesson what the change in x is. The change is a delta x, or the change in x. It would be x2 minus x1, my final minus my initial. For those of you who have taken any kind of physical science or physics, remember that how far I have gone on a trip would be where I ended up, subtracting from that where I began. So I'm looking at it saying, well, where did I end up? Well, I ended up at x2. Where did I start? I started at x1. So I'm saying x2 minus x1. Well, I have some numbers for that I can put in there. x2 is 1. That's where I ended up. Minus my x1, which is 10. And I'm saying, well, I want 2/3 of the way, and I want to go from my beginning part of 10. So once again, I say 1 minus 10, which happens to be -9. Then I go ahead and say -9 times a 2 gives me -18 over 3. Once again, remember there's an understood 1 underneath that 9. I know that gets a lot of people there, but that understood means I'm not taking 9 times each one of these. I'm taking 9 times the 2, -9 times the 2. That gives me -18 over 3. I divide 18 over 3, and I end up with my -6. And then I will say 10 plus a -6, which is 4. Now let's see how logical that is on my number line. 1, 2, 3, 4. Boy, look at how close we guessed that. That was pretty good. So I would look at that and say that is 2/3 of the way from 10 to 1. And if I looked at this, and of course my numbers are not perfect, but this would be about 1/3, and then another 1/3. That makes it 2/3, and there's my 3/3. So this one is 2/3 of the way from 10 to 1.